Hi, James. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us about the new project that you've been working on, the 4 seasons. It's just arrived on Netflix at the end of last week. So yeah, it's going to be great to hear about how you did the sound effects for them and how Krotos was kind of used in the process. So, I mean, the first thing would be, I guess, how you ended up working on the project. Like, how did it kind of fall into your lap, so to speak?
Sure. So I've been working with Little Stranger Productions, which is Tina Fey's production company, since about 2006 with 30 Rock. And I've done a lot of their TV series, not all of them, but a lot of them. I've worked on 30 Rock. I worked on Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. I worked on Mr. Mayor. We've sort of been with them a long time and we have a good rapport with them. So it came about very organically just because we've had such a good relationship. We had heard about it coming out and we said, oh, we'd love to do it. And there was a lot of back and forth because, the decisions aren't always who you think they are, right? Though they did say they really wanted to work with us. And so that was great that we got to do it again.
I guess that kind of helps when it comes to the sound effects and the kind of direction in which the sounds will go. So on that, I guess, what were the kind of considerations that you may have discussed in regards to how the sound should go for the 4 seasons?
With a lot of the Little Stranger productions, sound effects are meant to be organic. They are meant to highlight certain actions for comedic effect, but for the 4 seasons, it wasn't as over the top as, say, 30 Rock or Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. It was much more subdued. The dialogue, the written script is so powerful as far as getting what they want across that we're making it real. When they shoot on a set, we're making sure that the set sounds like real life instead of a set. In the 4 seasons, there's an episode where they go skiing and they didn't really go skiing, and so we had to make it seem like they were at a ski resort and such, like stuff like that. I mean, where they went to shoot, I think, was a ski resort. It's just that there was no snow at the time.
Yeah.
So there's things like that. And one of the biggest challenges with this show was that it traverses the 4 seasons of our year. Every 2 episodes is a different season. So we weren't ever in the same place. We were always moving. These characters see each other on vacation. The challenge was that I couldn't reuse things. Every 2 episodes, it was a new location with even if it wasn't a new location, it was a new season. And sound does change over the seasons. You have more or less birds, and depending on what part of the world you're in, you have different things happening too. So that was kind of the trickiest part, was being able to do that. And, with the way the schedule worked out, I had 5 days to edit sound effects for each half-hour episode. And so it was comfortable, but it definitely, for that much, having to go and find new things each time, it was definitely a little bit like, oh man, we're now in the Adirondacks or Colorado or, Puerto Rico or, so it's like, oh, okay, well, how do I make this sound work now?
It's interesting comparing this to something like 30 Rock, which is kind of silly and it's kind of highly comedic, whereas the 4 seasons, yes, it's still got that kind of Tina Fey's DNA in the program, but it does have that kind of serious aspects, where it's about these friendships and it's about how the the tension between them over time and how they're close and how they become distant. When it comes to working on something that's more comedic or more dramatic, do you find that the sound effects that you create and add to the program play up to those genres?
Sound and audio post-production, we're supporting what's given to us in many ways. So it depends on the way that they're steering it. Yes, sometimes in comedy you can go a little bit over the top as far as trying to add emphasis. It's just the same almost as an acting, right? You have this performance part of it that you have to sort of hit the right accent. Not that I approach comedy or drama or science fiction. I do approach them differently, but not terribly differently. I'm more following what they're giving me and then improvising with them, trying to make sure that my performance of sound matches the actor's performance, matches the writer's performance. It is different, I guess, technically, but for me, it's not because of the way I approach it, I guess.
Working on projects like this to kind of get a kind of understanding of how you would approach a project like that is really interesting to hear.
I've worked on so many different types of projects over my career. I like blending them, like there's a moment in 4 seasons, there's an explosion. I was given make the explosion. And well, I've worked on enough dramas, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, the Americans. I've done enough explosions. Okay, right? But at the same time, there's also like make them jumping into the lake as funny as the scene is, you know? And so, yeah, the water splashes are a little lighter and a little funnier, right? So I like the fact that I've been able to jump genres so much and pull from each genre to help the other.
I was wondering if you could kind of talk us through the process, because obviously this is a series, it goes over a number of episodes. Would you be able to kind of talk us through creating the sound effects for a single episode, for example?
The way the schedule works for me, especially on a series like this, the way the schedule worked was I wanted to be able to get through a sense of the show. So by laying down the backgrounds, I'm getting a sense of the episode while also doing the nitty gritty of what has to be done and gridding out the backgrounds. So I'd always start with a rough pass of ambiences and getting an idea of what happens throughout the episode. Then I go back in and I start putting in the normal hard effects. Oh, they opened a door. Oh, the car drove by. And then I go in and I start adding the accent pieces. You know, oh, in this background, it's a little bland. Let me spice it up a little bit so that there's a little more happening. Oh, this door was good, but you know what? Now that I'm listening to the dialogue a little bit more and I got an idea of what they're going for, let me add this oomph to it to make it seem a little harder, right? I make sure that the audience gets it by adding the sounds that are necessary and things like that. So that's usually my process. We had 5 days for this, which was, you know, an average time for what we get for a half-hour series. If I had more time, I could do other wonderful things with it. Less time would make it a little tough, but overall, that's sort of my process. The whole time I'm doing sort of broad strokes, getting to more finer and finer detail.
You've been an avid user of Krotos for a number of years now. Which ones did you kind of rely on the most for this project?
For this project, I relied heavily on Krotos Studio Pro and also on Reformer Pro. I needed those for the performability of them. Krotos Studio Pro, which I've been using since inception, I feel like it's been such a great tool for being able to trigger and perform and just rearrange sound effects and whatnot. The one thing that came in really handy on this project was the ambience generator. What was great about it is being able to use screenshots and quickly come up with 4 layers of a shot. Especially in this series, they particularly would do these establishing shots, especially at the beginning of every episode. And then usually about halfway through the episode, they'd do another series of them where they would be like, oh, here's a field and a meadow, and here's a field with a stream, and oh, here's a college campus. And you'd go back and forth with those things. And those shots would last, you know, maybe a second or 2 seconds. And what was great is I could take a screenshot, pop it into the ambience generator, and it would populate it with keywords to find your wind, your birds, your stream, and, you know, if it seemed like it was appropriate, some walla, some distant walla or something like that. And then I could mix it to my liking, because now it also populates it and it gives you 2 XY pads that you can control sort of the mix of it, of how much you want of each element. And then also what I would do is I take it and I do the multi-output of the tabs, where I could pull up those things as stems and put them into my template or into my edit session, really, and hand that over to the re-recording mixer so that if they felt like they needed more of something or they needed to move something wider or narrower, they could. And I ended up using that a lot to get that first broad stroke done. Then there are also things that happened, you know, I would need a wind. There's a episode where there's some extreme weather. And so I needed to be able to create some wind whipping around and such, and the weather elements in Krotos Studio Pro came in again because there's a couple of wind presets in there that were just, okay, let's move my XY around. And, you know, I have an XY MIDI controller that I use, and the XY MIDI controller is really great because for me, that gives me a tactile feel where I'm almost conducting the wind, you know, and since you could do the MIDI learn with Krotos Studio Pro, it was like, okay, let me MIDI learn this XY controller, and here we go. Like we're blowing things around, which was really great. I could add extra layers of elements just to emphasize falling on a bed or sitting or standing and all those sort of things. There's a whole pat section that I used from Krotos Studio Pro. And then also I'd use it for my own backgrounds. And this is one of the things I love about the Pro version of Krotos Studio, being able to go in underneath and put in my own sounds, because I have so many recordings that I've done over my career that I'm like, oh, I had this great bird sound from upstate New York, and one of the settings was actually upstate New York, and so I took that and I could put it into Krotos Studio Pro, and then since you can pick the granular engine for it, it made it a new background. It wasn't the same bird coming back every minute or whatever. It changed it around and did it so seamlessly that I love doing that too. It was great that way, that I could do that stuff. And then Reformer Pro, I mean, it's still one of my favorite go-tos because the performance there is different. I tend to do the performance with my vocal interaction going into it. And it's a different way of conducting from the XY pad. And not that I'm a singer by any chance, but it allows you to put that sort of different texture onto things. So there was a scene where they're walking on some ice, and I was able to take an ice library in Reformer Pro and add these extra cracks and stuff. And because I'm there with my voice, I could just sort of say words and it'd come out as a nice crack, which was really helpful and a good way for me to place sounds where I wanted them, almost in real time.
Was there any particular circumstances that you kind of found challenging to make the sound effects for?
I kind of knew what sounds were needed for each of those, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily came naturally. There was a skiing episode, and actually Krotos Studio and Reformer Pro both played a pretty strong part of this episode because there are skiing scenes in the skiing episode. Not a very big one, but a very cutty, actiony one. And skiing is kind of hard to edit the normal way. Especially the shots tend to be longer, but our recordings aren't necessarily longer, right? Because they have, quick buys, or, you have an onboard type skiing sound and you got to make it move, those sort of things. What I ended up doing a lot of for the skiing sounds was I would actually put them into Krotos Studio or Reformer, usually Studio though, because I found with skiing, it was easier to do the takes I needed, because I would do like coming down the hill, swerving and going off screen, that I could take it in Reformer Pro. I could take my skiing sounds, the longer ones, and I could modulate the pitch and make Doppler buys that had movement to them, because now I can not just do a Doppler buy. It's not just like putting it in a Doppler plugin or something like that. I can move it along the gain and the pitch to give it movement the whole way down until it goes by. So I did that a lot. We have 6 main characters that we're following, and during the skiing part, you have background actors. There's actually multiple groups that we're following. So I had a lot of skiing to do. And so that helped me not only add movement to the sounds that I didn't have movement for before, but I could also quickly change it up so that I could make each skier have their own sound, not terribly different, but different enough that you knew, oh, there's more than one person skiing right now. Again, the performability allowed me to match the action, which is a tough thing to do when you're cutting sound effects. And, it was a great compliment to have the Foley. The Foley team that did this for us was wonderful. And this just added an extra texture on top of it that gave it more movement, that even the Foley team, we wanted a little more bite, or we wanted a little more something, and we could just add this extra texture on top. You just cut sound effects and you cut them on top of Foley, because we've been doing this forever, right? We've put sound effects on top of Foley performances. But when you cut them, sometimes the timing doesn't work. You're cutting and you're slightly off, or the sound that you're cutting in doesn't quite flow the same way that the Foley artist flows. That by giving your sound effects a performance aspect, that you can time it better. The Foley team and I were working at the same time, so they're shooting their Foley while I'm editing sound effects. So we didn't necessarily always have each other's work to work off of for the episode. But by being able to perform the things I would normally have to cut, it was closer that when we got the Foley, that we could layer them much easier and have them complement each other much better than before.
You've worked on like many different projects up to this point, and you've worked on many different genres. Are you kind of convinced by the idea of Krotos Studio Pro being like a professional level tool?
It's a really great multi-tool. The Pro vehicles, which, wow, I wish I had that during the 4 seasons. It has this drivability that we didn't have before, which is amazing. It's also so flexible that if you feel like you don't have what you need, you can make it. Across all the time that I've used Krotos Studio Pro, it's been great because I'm like, oh, I wish I could. Wait, I can, and I could take the sound and I can put it in one of the engines, and I can make layers of it, and then I can modulate, like the skiing, where I can modulate the gain and the pitch to make my own movements. I've used that for camera tricks before, where they do, speed ramps with the camera as it's going through shot. I've been able to take sounds that I have, say a crowd sound. There might be a crowd at a party and the camera's zooming through and then slows down to highlight somebody. So I've been able to take crowd sounds, put them into Krotos Studio Pro, modulate with XY pad movements. There's a lot of plugins, a lot of tools that we buy, and they're great. They're wonderful tools, but you're like, is this going to last? How long is this going to last? And right now, what I'm loving about Krotos Studio is that you're seeing the development, you're getting updates that show you that there's still work happening behind the scenes. You're getting more for your money each time. You're getting new sounds, watching, this thing grow. A lot of times I get asked a lot because obviously I do talk about Krotos a lot. One of the things that I find is people always ask me, oh, which one should I get? Should I get Reformer Pro? Should I get Studio? And I'm like, I've been watching it grow from Dehumanizer into Reformer, into Igniter and Weaponizer, and now Krotos Studio Pro. And you're kind of watching this family of tools, and not one is better than the other. They're different. They're all different, and they all add their own flavor to it. Just like an audio team, right? The dialogue and the effects, they all add something to it.
Thank you so much for your time, James.
Of course, anytime.